All right, so here we are. It is an early Thursday morning, I believe, but it's pretty early. It's still dark outside, so we'll see. Here we go. We're going to talk about long bones, as opposed to short bones, I suppose. Long bones, which we have not talked about in skeletal system notes, because we didn't get there. I'm going to go ahead and do this first. This is the long bone. Long bone is kind you think of Bam Bam and Pebbles wearing in their hair and stuff. Okay, they're skinny in the middle. They got big fat ends at each end. Okay, this is a long bone. Most of the long bones are going to be found in your arms, either the radius and ulna and the humerus, your legs, femur, and your tibia and fibula. All right, so they're very long bones, okay, and they tend to be knobby at the ends, some more than others. Now, this is particularly not a human bone. This is the cow bone, so it's a little bit knobbier and heavier than ours would be. Okay, so anyhow, this is a long bone. We see a picture of one over here. This is, if you should be able to tell that this is exactly which long bone. That's correct. It is a femur because it has this big ball socket joint here on the end. Okay, so that is our a femur, and so it's our typical long bone. Okay, so let's look at it first. First part is A, which you notice is marked up here, this little section from here to here, but it's also marked down here from here to here. So the two ends of the bone, this end, are the epiphysis. All right, and it can either be the proximal or the distal. All right, now for this one, we can see the little hip socket bone is here, so that would be the proximal end. Down here would be the distal end. On here, this would be the proximal. So if you want to label that over here, top of it with the hip joint is the proximal. This would be the distal epiphysis. Okay, that way we can say precisely which. I didn't say that very precisely. Precisely which epiphysis are we talking about? Because obviously, if they're at opposite ends, that could be bad if someone's doing surgery and they get on the wrong end of the bone and start taking it apart. Okay, so we have proximal and epiphysis. Now, the epiphysis is made mostly of spongy bone. All right, I don't know if you can see this very good, so I'm going to blow it up to bigger. All right. If you can look inside occasionally where you see a crack, on the outside it looks hard and same as the rest, but if you see where there's little breaks in it and stuff, you can see that it looks real spongy-ish. Okay, it looks like honeycomb, sometimes we call it. All right, so it's kind of honeycomb bone and stuff like that. All right, here's another one, end of one, and once again, you can see the all the little air holes and spaces in there on the inside. Okay, I don't know if you can see in there very good, but there's also some spongy-like bone starting on the inside there. Okay, we'll talk more about that in a minute, but all right. So it's mostly made of spongy bone, as opposed to this part of the bone, which we'll look at in a minute, and it has a long, very hard, solid bone, what we normally think of as bone being a very hard substance, okay? But the epiphysis are spongy bone. A lot of times if you find old bones or a dog's been chewing on them, they will tend to chew on the epiphysis and the spongy bone because it's softer, easier to chew up. And there's also a lot of bone marrow and stuff that's tasty on the inside of these, okay? All right. Now, B, which is this middle section over here, from here all the way down to here, what we would call the shaft or the main part of the bone is called the diaphysis. All right. The diaphysis is much harder. This is where it has to have the strength of the bone. Okay. If you look at this one, you can see this part right here is the diaphysis or shaft, and it is just solid. There is no little spaces. There are no honeycombing or whatever. It's very hard, solid bone. Okay. And as you can see, this broke, but I think I had to take a hammer if I remember right. I had one the kid accidentally dropped and broke. And then the other one, we took a hammer too. And so, yeah. But anyway, you can see the inside of that. All right. It looks much different than the spongy bone that we find in the other one. All right. So, for diaphysis, you need to know that it is sometimes called the bone shaft, okay, the long part of the bone. And it is made of what we call compact bone. It's tightly packed, it's very hard, and that's what gives the bone its strength. When people's hips wear out and things like that, it's usually the ends of the bone that wear out because they are the more spongy bone. All right. Now, On the end of the bones, there is a thin layer of cartilage, okay, which makes sense if you think about how the bone works, okay. The socket right there is going to be inside the hip socket, and it's going to be sliding on there every time you move your leg. So it needs to have a slick covering. Now, I don't know if you can really tell this, but this one is actually kind of yellow colored and slick, shiny on it, okay, as opposed to the more whiter part of the bone. And that's because there's still a little bit of that cartilage has dried on there, okay? So it's very hard. It's hyaline cartilage, okay? And it's called articular cartilage because it's in the joint. And where bones touch, we say they articulate. So another articulation is just another name for a joint. If it's where the bones articulate, that's where they come together. Okay, so this is called the articular cartilage because it is in the joint and it's there to keep it rubbing. Now, if it wears off, eventually, it's very hard hyaline cartilage, but eventually if it wears off, then I forgot to bring something today. Okay, yeah, the hyaline cartilage, it will wear off, then it starts grinding, and that's when people's hips start really hurting, especially as they get older and it starts wearing out. And then they have a hip replacement where they put a little piece of metal with a plastic ball here and let it slide and stuff like that. Okay, so that's the articular cartilage, which is made of hyaline hard cartilage. Okay, and that's on the end here. It also has some, you notice, on this end down here where it rubs against the other bone. So it's going to be where it touches other bones. Okay, so right here and right here, it's going to be the outer surface there. Right. All right, it's very smooth, it's very hard, and it helps keeps the bones from, it says the joints from rubbing, but really it's keeping the actual bone surfaces from rubbing against each other. You don't want bone on bone. Bone on bone is going to grate and grind and wear down the bone. So that is not good. And it can literally wear down the joint. My mom, before she got her hip replacement surgery, one leg was probably literally a couple inches, an inch or two shorter than the other one. It had done a lot of damage to it before they actually got the hip replacement done. All right. Next one is the periosteum. This is the thin layer on the outside of the bone. Okay, it's like a little coating around the bone. All right. If we look at our bone here, this one's not a real old bone. These are probably tendons and things like that and rough stuff like that. But you can see there's a, maybe you can, maybe you can't, I don't know, but there's a coating on the bone. There's a few spaces of the dark stuff left on there, like right there and stuff. Okay, so yeah, some of that rough stuff there and everything, that's probably part of the periosteum. It's just a coating around the bone, okay? And para means around, osteum, osteoporosis, osteo means bone, so it's around the bone. So it's just a covering around the bone. So it's a pretty logical name for it. All right. So it is a fibrous membrane that covers the bone. Okay, so just like a membrane or a wrapper. Down here, they peeled off a piece of it right there, so that would be the periosteum. So all the way up here, it'll be the periosteum, 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 until you hit the cartilage. Okay, and then it gives way to cartilage. Then on the other side, it picks up with the periosteum and goes all the way around again until it gets down here, and eventually gives way to cartilage, and there's periosteum, periosteum around there. So it's the outside layer. Now, this has a very rich blood supply. There's lots of blood vessels through this tissue because your bones are alive. They do have cells in them that need to get food and get rid of waste and stuff. And so there is a big blood supply going to your bones. That's why if you break a bone, it will repair itself fairly quickly. Cartilage, ligaments, tendons, not so much because they either have no blood supply or very little. All right, but your bones have a lot, and that's why if you have a broken bone, it'll heal fairly quickly because there's lots of blood bringing in nutrients and new supplies and repair and the immune system and white cells to fix things and stuff like that. So it does have a very good bone supply, the blood supply in your bone. All right, this is also where we have cells called osteoblast. Osteo means bone, blast means to make. Okay, I think we had fibroblasts when we talked about connective tissue. Okay, well, these are osteoblasts, and osteoblasts are going to make bone. So these are cells that make bone. And so if you need more bone cells, the periosteum makes them. Then they go and attach to the outside of the bone, and then they secrete themselves, and they secrete calcium around them. okay, which makes it a little bit bigger there, and then they're locked in. And then another one will come and do that, another one will come and do that. And once they get coated in, they're called osteocytes or mature bone cells, and they're kind of locked in. And they just keep doing that. If enough cells do that, then it starts adding bone tissue to the outside. Okay? Also, other bone cells come from there. All right, we'll talk about osteoclast here in a little bit. All right. Now, obviously, if you have this wrapper, it can't be very loose. It needs to be very tight. So it's almost like this is just coated to the skin. And there are little tiny fibers called Sharpie's fibers that help attach it very tightly to the skin. So it's like a layer that you can't hardly get rid of. It's just right there up against it. All right. All right. E is spongy bone. We talked about it, but when you cut open the bone, you noticed down here toward this end, you start getting spongy bone, and then this whole knobby thing in here is pretty much spongy bone, except for this little white line right there and a white line there. We'll talk about that in a minute. But this is spongy bone, okay? And you can see where that is. If I showed you, I don't know that you can see it real well on this one, like I said, but if you get the light just right, let's see if I can blow this up and you can see it. No, maybe not. Okay. You can see just a little bit of it starting there around the edge, where you can see where you're starting to get a little of the honeycomb stuff and stuff like that right there. But it just continues to do more and more of that as you go up into the head of the bone, or the epiphysis. Okay, so the epiphysis, like we said earlier, is filled with that spongy bone. You can see down here, starting the same thing. It's starting to make more spongy bone, and it would all be spongy bone down here. All right. Now, also, E with a little asterisk by it is this little clear spot right here. All right. Obviously, your bones are going to get bigger as you grow. Okay. You all have about hit maturity, so you're probably not going to get a whole lot taller than you are now. So hopefully you like the height you're at, because you're probably not going to get any more. But the epiphyseal plate, epiphyseal just means on the epiphysis. Plate just means a straight line there. So this is what we call the growth plate. You may hear about, oh, he got injured and it was near his growth plate. If you injure your bone near the end and you're young, they're afraid that if it damages this, your bone will quit growing, and then one leg's going to keep growing, the other leg's not, and you're going to obviously have some issues there. So this is the epiphyseal plate. And this is where the bone adds more bone material to make it get longer. All right. Let me look at a quick thing here. All right, go back here. All right, this is a young cow bone. All right, if you look, there's a line that goes right through there and comes off over here and comes all the way around the other side, okay, up here. So it's kind of like there's like a little cap on the end here. And so what it does, it just adds more bone material right beneath it, and it pushes the cap farther up. And so you have this little floating cap going up that gets pushed farther and farther up, and it just keeps adding more bone underneath it, okay? Now, if you get to an old cow, like this one, you may still kind of see a little scar-looking thing where it used to be, but you can't see it anymore. Why? Because they quit growing. And your bones are about that stage where this is normally cartilage right there, and underneath it, it just starts putting new bone on it. But eventually, when you reach your full size, the cartilage goes away and it fuses together, and now it's not going to grow anymore, and you have officially quit growing. Some of you may still have a little bit of growth spurt left, but for the most part, you're done, okay? Hopefully you like how tall you are. All right, so this is a line of cartilage at the end of bones where calcium is added to make the bones larger, okay? I am going to have to stop right there because we're about to get to the end of this. And so we will continue with another video momentarily.